Hello, America, and welcome to the Glenn Beck program. I often use the famous line, "Those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it," because there is a ton of truth in that statement. And what's shocking is how easy it is for people to forget. The world said never again after the Holocaust, yet Israel continues to be the target of annihilation, and most of the world sides with the Palestinian terrorists. That's why it is so crucial to hang on to artifacts so the truth can be safely passed on from generation to generation. At the same time, we need to tell their stories so the same mistakes won't be repeated again and again. This is why I have dedicated so much time and effort and money into collecting historic items, so we will never forget. We hope to build a museum here in Texas sometime very soon with David Barton. But today I wanted to take you into some of the Mercury vaults with David Barton and one of my staff members who has been helping me curate and build the museum collection. His name is Jeremy Boyd. I've asked them to take you through the history of George Washington through some of the items that we have here in the Mercury vaults. Thanks to politics, simply referencing the founders has become almost a punchline. Those on the left mock its use, while those on the right probably use it too often without much substance behind it. But when you really look into some of these items, you get a better feel for who these people were and why they were so committed to doing what they were doing. In March of 1783, George Washington was speaking to the officers of the army and said, quote, "If freedom of speech is taken away, then dumb and silent may we be led like sheep to the slaughter." As our country continues to rapidly change, we must stop and go back and look at those that came before us and listen to their words of warning. Today, I want us to learn about what kind of man George Washington was from eyewitness accounts. Eyewitness accounts. Watch.
Welcome to upstairs above the studio where that Glenn keeps so much of the artifacts that he collects. Jeremy, you've seen Jeremy before. Jeremy Boyd is, I guess you got charge of kind of the museum stuff. You're in charge of this
a little
stuff.
bit, trying to help out wherever I can.
You also tend to be a pilot from time to time. All the years in the Air Force, now you're flying Glenn around in pilot. So a lot of stuff you got. We pulled out some stuff this morning to show you and walk through. So where do you want to start?
Let's start off with a piece that we picked up a couple of years ago. And it is one of those phenomenal pieces that we just found in the middle of nowhere in an auction, George Washington's Atlas, 1932. Since we have a couple pieces of George Washington.
1932.
Yes.
Washington's birthday is 1732.
Bicentennial.
So we're bicentennial.
Correct. And we have a couple pieces in our collection from Washington, one of them being the compass. And I thought, what a great thing. We'll get the surveys and go over that. And so we opened that up. I got this at the house and I'm sitting here as it was delivered going through it. And I'm like just amazed at the detail that Washington had when he went over these drawings. As a young man.
Yeah, he starts this as a teenager.
Correct. He was a teenager.
Maps from when he was a teenager.
We've got Mount Vernon. We come across, and one of the neat pieces that we find is a sketch of how to march with the troops going into the forest, picking up prisoners and bringing them out of the forest. And I mean, it's detailed with cannons and everything. It's just incredible. So all the while I'm looking at this piece in my kitchen and I'm going, oh, this is incredible. And I come across this page and I go, you have got to be kidding me. And it is a map of Stony Point. Now it's annotated by Washington on 3 July 1779. The battle commenced on 16 July 1779. So this is a couple weeks prior. Washington has got this map.
Why do you military guys say the date before the month?
It's all
July
protocol.
16th. It's not 16 July. What is the deal?
I don't know. It's the way that they wrote it back then. It's the way we learned it in the military. It's ingrained in us. But here we are, Stony Point. Washington had this map 2 weeks prior to the battle. And I'm going, you have got to be kidding me. So I look at the documents from Mad Anthony General Wayne that we've got. I mean, it is just incredible to see what had happened and what conspired there that day. So here we go. Got Mad Anthony Wayne at 2 o'clock in the morning on 16 July writing to Washington saying the fort and garrison with Colonel John Stone, who was a British guy.
A little timeout. What you've got, Stony Point, is an embankment of military cannon stuff on the Hudson, and you get the British fleet in the Hudson that's going up through New York. And so we're really trying to take a British stronghold.
We are.
And so it's really like a spec ops kind of a thing that they do.
Yeah, if you look here, you can see how
there's the river right there.
That's the Hudson.
And you got Stony Point here, Verplank Point here. The British Navy goes up and down here. And so with these two cannon places high up over the river, you can cut off the Americans from moving anything up and down there. They've got control of that area of New York because they've got the Hudson River there.
Correct, and it's a commanding view of everything north and south. So we were there a couple months ago, and I got to see it, and it is incredible. It is incredible, and whoever owns that point owns the Hudson in this area.
So what happens is late at night, now all this is kind of swampy and marsh around here. It's almost like an island out there, even though it's connected to land. It's really peninsula, but it looks like an island. So you have Matt Anthony Wayne, who takes his crack elite troops, and they come up, started, what was it?
Midnight.
They started at midnight. At midnight, and you know, no flashlights, no night vision stuff.
Nothing.
They're going up after the British troops. They come up at midnight, and because they're coming up from both sides, the Americans go with unarmed guns. Their guns have no loads in them because they don't want to shoot each other.
In the middle of the night,
so
correct.
you're attacking a British fort with guns empty, and within 1 hour, or 25 minutes, I guess,
25
they had
minutes.
taken the fort, controlled it, and then they turned the cannons and started firing on the British on the
That's
other
correct.
side.
Interesting point. The Americans were issued a piece of white paper that they put on the back of their hats. So as they attacked, they would know who was friendly and who was foe.
You might see, but they had no moon that night either.
No.
So you know, you hope you see the white bobbing around on the hat.
Please don't shoot.
Yeah. So it's a pretty intriguing battle. But that's what the map is of that Washington sent here to General Heath, and then this is where after 25 minutes, Matt Anthony Wayne writes Washington and says the famous quote.
Correct. 2 o'clock in the morning. Here is a letter from Anthony Wayne that is sent to Washington. Here's Washington letters. It actually includes a portion in here that talks about Matt Anthony Wayne getting shot in the head at the beginning of the battle, but he continued on with his troops. And then here at the time, Governor Clinton, who helped write the Declaration of Independence, but never signed
Governor
it.
Clinton was one of the guys who approved the Declaration of Independence on July the 2nd and July the 4th, but his signature never appeared on the Declaration because they signed it on they approved independence on the 2nd of July, they approved the Declaration on the 4th of July, and then on the 2nd of August they signed it. In the meantime, New York had called him home to take care of all the military forces in New York, so he never got signed. Another New York guy, Robert Livingston, is one of the 5 guys who authored the Declaration, and he right there helped write it. He never got to sign it because New York called him home to take charge of all the judicial system in New York. So 2 great New York patriots who approved the Declaration, just never got to sign it.
So this is Governor Clinton saying congratulations to the troops in General Washington. So as I'm reading and looking at this book, I'm amazed that in the Atlas of George Washington, we have got a copy of the battle.
Him sending that, it looks very close to that map, him sending that to General Heath. And General William Heath was the guy who's in charge of that whole Hudson River region for the American Army.
That section. So it's amazing, and this book continues on, and it goes later on in his life. You can see the progress of his signature. At the very back, it's got maps of where he would have traveled, cities that he would have visited, locations. But we get to the very end here, and this is probably the best gem of them all, is a drawing by Washington when he was 14 years old. And what is it a drawing of? The compass. And we have in our collection the compass that Washington had when he was given when he was a kid. In fact, I brought it today. We can pull that out. Now, if you notice, David, that the compass is not identical to the one here. And so in my mind's eye, and I am not a historian by any sense, I think Mary Washington, his mother, saw him draw that at the age of 14 and said, you know what, we probably need to get young George a compass.
Because he's already been doing surveying for a good bit at this point.
Yes.
But by the time he's 14, he's been surveying lots of stuff around the area.
So here is his compass. And in this book that we picked up at auction by mistake, I was like, let's get it. It's not that much. We'll grab it. And it has 2 gems of history found.
And that's got 1 dot, that one's got 3. And we know he got this one when he was young.
Yes.
But like you're right. I mean, his mom could say, hey, let's get George something, because it appears to be real interested, and that's where he gets
That's the compass that he would have received from
and
the
by
family.
the way, this is pretty wild here. That's called a chain.
Correct.
And how they measured that chain, what's it, 22 feet or something?
Well, they had a scale. If you look down here, the scale, you would line the chain up and you could tell distance-wise, and then you could take out, hey, they're the military guy in me speaking, their cannons are X amount, and they can have a range of this. So I'll put my point, this is my troops, I'll draw my chain out to the distance that their cannons can cover, and I'll draw my circle and say, do not get closer than that circle because the cannons can reach you there.
Yeah.
You think about that on the military sense.
And from distance-wise, that's how they surveyed how many acres, et cetera. Even at our ranch that we have here in Texas, I had to replace a fence last year. And the surveyors back in the 1800s had surveyed from the north down and from the south up. And it turned out that my fence line was right where the surveyors ended. And they were going across mountains with these chains measuring. And as you're going across mountains and ravines and everything else, you're going to get some distance wrong. And so when they tried to figure out where my property line was, one surveyor had it 600 feet this way, the other had it 600 feet this way, because the guy who came down from north, you know, that's just not a real, you don't have the GPS stuff.
Correct.
And so that's why a lot of counties have county surveyors to settle where the line is going to be now, because back then it was an inaccurate art.
Wow.
So
amazing.
Surveying with the chain, and that was the big, and you know, for him as a 14-year-old to take that and he puts one in and loops it over and you just measure acre after acre after acre. Amazing stuff.
Amazing. So that's one of the pieces that we have in our collection that is just phenomenal. The George Washington Atlas, 1932. If you find a copy, pick it up. It's incredible.
And that you had in there showing the map too of how he was moving prisoners. And that would have been a big deal for them when you get to the Battle of Saratoga. In Saratoga in 1777, we captured 5,000 British prisoners. And the question becomes, how do you move those prisoners? And so what Washington had laid out in there is, here's how you move prisoners. Because we've never had, I mean, our guys, they're farmers, they're school teachers, they're whatever. How do you move prisoners? And so to move 5,000, and it really was unique in that period of time, is there was a lot more honor, if you will, in war. At Saratoga, Burgoyne was the British general and General Gates was our general, and we made the British soldiers sign a parole if they promised not to shoot at us anymore. We let them keep their guns, and we marched them in that drawing that Washington had. They were armed, we were armed, they were armed, but they promised they wouldn't shoot at us, so we gave them their gun back, and we marched them all the way and put them on ships to go back to England.
Wouldn't happen today. It would not happen
there's
today.
No way it would happen
no
today.
way.
You probably wouldn't do that with your neighbor, you know. But that was the difference back then. So a lot of fun stuff out of that. While we're on it, you know, Washington, hit this one. Go into that one.
This is an incredible piece, Last Men of the Revolution. So this is written by a reverend in 1864 by the name of E.B. Hillard. And relatively new, 20 years or so, the invention of the camera had come into play. And he said, you know what? We need to go find everybody that is remaining, that's still alive from the revolution.
We're in the middle of Civil War now.
This is the middle of Civil War.
We're 2 generations away from, you know, 2 generations away from the revolution for sure.
So he takes the camera and he goes and he finds 6, I believe, centurions at the time, all fighters of the Revolutionary War, takes their picture and tells their story. So in this book you find, they didn't have Kinko's back there or one of those stores that you get things published. These are all original photographs that have been hand cut out and glued into this book. And it is just amazing, the stories of some of the guys. One of the ones that I'd like to highlight is a young guy. In fact, he was too young to fight during the Revolutionary War.
Oh, wait a minute. Let's just, this is, because all these guys are 100 years old or older at this point. And so you have these guys here. That's one of them, this guy you're about to talk about. And we just need to understand, at the time they signed the Constitution, which was after the Revolution, the average lifespan in America was 33 years old. Mm-hmm. So we're talking guys who are 100 years old. Now, it's true that if you could live to be 20, you'd probably live for a while. It was all the childhood diseases that got you. It was the smallpox and the mumps and the measles and whatever. But 100 years old at that point in time, with a 33-year average lifespan in America, these are tough guys.
They
at
are
this point
very
in time.
tough.
These are tough.
And their stories are incredible. So this gentleman here, Alexander Milliner, was a drummer. He was too young to fight, so he was a drummer in the Revolutionary War. And it talks about here, it says, too young at the time of his enlistment for service in the ranks, he was enlisted as a drummer boy, and in the capacity he served 4 years in Washington's Life Guard. He had a great favorite, he says, with the commander-in-chief, who used frequently after the beating of reveille to come along and pat him on the head and call him his boy. On one occasion, a bitter cold morning, he gave him a drink out of his flask. His recollection of Washington is distinct and vivid. He was a good man, a beautiful man. He was always pleasant, never changing countenance, but wore the same in defeat and retreat as in victory. And he goes on and talks about incidents where Washington invited him to play with some of the other generals and ended up giving him quite a bit of money, $15 by the end of the drumming that he did. That's amazing.
$15 is a lot of bucks back, and it's a lot for a kid too.
Correct.
The drummer boy.
Also of note, his mother was a clothes washer for the troops because he wanted to be, or she wanted to be close to her son.
So she traveled with the Army washing clothes for soldiers, and yeah.
That's amazing. The very beginning of this book, kind of telling, E.B. Hillard mentions, see if we can find it here. Our own eyes, or our own, are the last eyes that will look on men who looked on Washington. Our ears, the last that will hear the living voices of those who heard his voice.
So he's saying, and see, notice how much they venerate Washington. Washington is the guy. Hey, these are the last guys who heard Washington speak. These are the last guys who actually saw. We got to get close to these guys. And so the veneration for Washington is something that is kind of lost today. Washington is not the hero he used to be, and that's unfortunate. But that's a lot. And by the way, one of the guys in here, little piece of trivia on one of them right here, is Daniel Waldo. You see Daniel sitting right there? When he was 90 years old, he was made the chaplain of the House of Representatives. So when he's 90 years old, he is the chaplain of the U.S. House of Representatives. 90 years old. And I think that was like 1852. I think they made him chaplain, but he was chaplain of the House, preaching like crazy. And so, you know, that would have been cool too, because now you got Daniel Webster at the end of his life. John Quincy Adams has just passed away, but here's the guy who was with Washington back in the day that was part of the Revolution. So a fun book. And by the way, some of the veneration we held for Washington is in the entertainment that we used for literally generations. These are all crossword puzzles, and I'm going to show you something about these puzzles for a minute. These are all really, I have just boxes of these things.
So these crossword puzzles are these normal kids' puzzles?
These are kids' puzzles.
Yeah, you'd build.
What's pretty amazing about it is they are out of wood.
Oh.
So everything is out of wood, and they use the little saws and press to do it. But, I mean, look at the pieces. Look at the shape of that piece. I mean, this stuff, each one is a piece of artwork by itself. And so you have hundreds of these pieces in here. Look how they fit together.
Perfect.
Those, you know, this wood stuff that fits together so much. And so it looks like the state of New Jersey. And they have all sorts of things in here. Then on the backside, they're really cool to see, but they're wood. Now, here's the fun thing about these puzzles. And by the way, let me pick a couple of others out here just for grins. The same way. This is entertainment. So this is their Xbox. This is their, you know, Nintendo, whatever. This is what kids do. Say on the outside, perplex, jigsaw puzzles, and so everybody kind of gathers around, family doing puzzle stuff, and so the same thing here. And as you look inside, I mean, these are all wooden pieces with the artwork on top, and that's, you know, a lot of pieces in that thing. You imagine, I mean, it's just.
That's not laser engraved. That's for sure. They did not cut that out with lasers.
No, that's right. And so that's a craft all by itself. Now, here's the fun part. All these puzzles. Let me just take you through the pictures. I'm going to show you the pictures here of what they are. Let's just even lay them out, because we'll get these. There's Washington talking to his generals. There's Washington kneeling in front of his mother.
Mary Washington.
There is George Washington riding up on the troops. There is George Washington sitting for a painting with Peel. Here's George Washington inspecting the troops. Here's George Washington addressing his officers. Here's George Washington speaking to his cabinet. Here's George Washington meeting with Lafayette. Here's George Washington looking at the Navy. Here's George Washington with granddaughter Nellie Custis. He adopted Nellie. Nellie's parents died, and so he adopted Nellie. She raised 20 years at Mount Vernon. I mean, here's outside Independence Hall. Here's the Liberty Bell. Now, Washington. I don't think Cheryl and I do lots and lots of puzzles. I've never seen a puzzle of George Washington ever in this era, ever. And just how many dozens do you want back then? I mean, and here's one of those puzzles, and what is that? That is Mount Vernon, Washington's home. And here's one of the puzzles as well, and there's Washington. There's a clergyman. There's, looks like some kind of divine service going on. But these are the puzzles. I mean, we stressed Washington, the character of Washington. And the other thing that's kind of interesting is other puzzles from that period. Here's the nativity scene. Here is the Lord is my shepherd. Here's a family singing at church. Here's the Madonna and Child. Here's the outside of a big church. Here's the first church service at Jamestown, Virginia. So it was all like God and country kind of stuff. You know, we had that emphasis on God and country with Washington at the center of all of that. And it's just such a different tone from anything we have this era.
That's incredible.
And again, not only do Cheryl and I not have any epistles with George Washington, we don't even have any epistles that have religious themes to them. There's
well,
some
actually, I think
Americana
you probably
themes.
do, but it just sit in the vaults, right?
Yeah, that's right. We have lots of them from previous generations, but there's just nothing today that
Nothing
picks up the tone
currently.
of that.
That's
And
amazing.
Yeah, and you know, one other to pick up here too, related to Washington. There was, at the Battle of Stony Point, some of this was involved, but this piece here from Washington is, you read here, and this is in German. It's all written in German. And as it turns out, this is George Washington with not all, but with many of his foreign generals. Let's see if we can get them down here. There's DeKalb, General DeKalb right there, General von Steuben, General Pulaski, General Kosciuszko, General Lafayette, General Muhlenberg, Peter Muhlenberg. So all these foreign generals, and people don't recognize how many nations came to help America during the American Revolution. When Patrick Henry did his speech on Give Me Liberty, Give Me Death, he said, God will raise up nations to help us, and literally did. Yeah. So all of these guys are part of it. This pistol right here, set this back down, this pistol right here is an Irish pistol from the Revolution that was used by Washington's generals. Washington had 20 generals who were Irish, and this is the pistol they used, and it's really cool. Look at the embossing and the metal inside the wood there. It's just, it's remarkable how this is. But this is one of the pistols from those Irish generals. So the American Revolution had a lot of foreign help in it, just a whole lot. And our immigration thing, you know, we don't have the same commitment to America today we had then, which is why this is kind of fun. This is called How to Become an American Citizen, the Naturalization Laws of the United States. And this is called the Alien's Textbook on Citizenship, if you're a foreigner coming in. This was done at the end of World War I. This is done at the beginning of World War II, because at the end of World War I, everybody wants out of Europe. After what happened, they want to come to America. We're stable. At the beginning of World War II, you have Poland invade, you have Germany invade Poland, Czechoslovakia, so they're starting to come to America. So these are the naturalization laws of the United States. If you want to become a citizen of the United States, here's what you need to know. And the introduction to both of these books, I want to read you just a little part here. You've never been to America before, but you want to become a citizen. And so the question is, we're going to give you all the laws. We're going to show you the Constitution, the Declaration. We're going to tell you how our military works. It's what you need to know for the test. Here's the oath you're going to take as an American citizen. But here, what is an American? An American is a man who is greater in his soul than in his class, creed, political party, or the section in which he lives. To be an American, a man must have an American soul, believe in the spiritual realities upon which America rests and out of which it was born. America was created to unite mankind by those passions which lift and not by the passions which separate and debase. We came to America, either ourselves or in the person of our ancestors, to better the ideals of men, to make them see finer things. Listen to this, to get rid of the things that divide and to make sure of the things that unite. You want to come to America? You need to understand there's a spiritual reality here. You got to have a spiritual commitment. You got to have a spiritual foundation. We don't care about your creed or your class, your political party. We don't care what group you're from. We don't want to be divided. We want to be united. Exactly opposite now. Our immigration policy says, oh, you're from that group. We got too many from that group. We need you from this. It's no longer can you contribute. It's what group are you from? And so you go back to Washington and what they did at the time. If you wanted to come here and make America better, if you wanted to come here and have a spiritual soul of America, the spiritual realities, if you wanted an American soul, this is the place to be. And compare that to our immigration today. But under Washington and what we did in the Revolution, it's real different from where we are today.
It's amazing. Different from today, that is for sure.
You've got some stuff from people who knew Washington. That set of books. Tell us about that.
So here we go. This is a 5-volume set. We'll bring it back here. It's kind of interesting in my work. I get to restore some of these items. So this is kind of showing you some of the process.
You need to go. You need to go in that because you didn't do this when it got started. Glenn was buying stuff, and as he's buying stuff, as 200-year-old stuff often is, it's not in great shape.
No.
And so
he looks at me one day and he goes, "Jeremy, I need you to learn how to bookbind." And I'm like, "What?
Is that anything like flying a plane?"
I'm like, you got to be
I've flown
kidding
for the
me.
Air Force for years, so it's.
So I went and found a master bookbinder that actually lives here in Dallas and has got some world recognition for some of his binding. And I take classes from him on how to repair, protect, conserve books and documents. And it's amazing some of the things we get to do. And so this is...
Wait a minute. Some of the things we get to do, pull out stony point. Pull out stony point. That is what you did.
Correct.
This is your handiwork.
A custom clamshell.
All of this has been done by Jeremy. He did all of this stuff that opens up, and every bit of this. So this is the kind of stuff that Air Force pilots do once Glenn tells them to learn how to bookbind. So this is it's remarkable, and that one's yours too, right?
This one is mine as well. This is one of the fun ones.
Yeah.
In fact, we took a medallion from the early 1900s and embedded it in the front of the front.
And so leather bound here.
And on the back. And everything is built around to highlight what is in the book or what it's protecting. And so in this scenario, we have the compass with...
And see, that's what you built.
Correct.
So
From scratch.
You are quite a remarkable bookbinder now.
I watched a couple YouTube videos and figured it out.
Exactly.
Coming up next on the Glenn Beck program.
This came out in 1855. John Frederick Schroeder took that 1832 set of Washington's writings, and this is called the Maxims of George Washington. And so what he does is he goes through and gets all the pithy sayings of Washington. There's really good sayings that Washington has. There's sayings on morality and agriculture and Congress and laws and foreign affairs. And at the end of this thing, it's got his sayings, his maxims on Christianity.
Welcome back. I'm joined by David Barton and the curator of our museum collection, Jeremy Boyd, and they're walking us through some incredible items that have never been seen before on this program. Amazing items that give us a rare insight into who our founders are and what they tell about us. Watch.
Okay, so as you keep developing your skills and you're getting into more and more stuff's going on, you're now doing what?
Well, I am fascinated by how detailed our founding fathers were in their writing. I mean, it's just incredible. You look at the Declaration of Independence and how well it was executed, writing form, and how incredible. And so I picked up a fountain pen and started to learn how to write. And so Winston Churchill and a quote from him, and Benjamin Franklin, a quote from him.
I mean, look how elaborate that script is, that font. And public schools today, under Common Core, we don't even teach handwriting anymore. So this looks like old school stuff, bro.
My wife and I have 5 little ones, and all of them are learning cursive. All of them are learning how to write with fountain pens.
That's not cursive, man. That is calligraphy.
This is the next level. But yes, I'm teaching the little ones how to.
So you're going back and you're becoming a master of all these old skills that really were at that time, so that now you can take this. So this is a 5-volume set of the life of George Washington.
Correct. Started in 1805 and finished in 1807. So this is one of the...
Now wait a minute, who was it that did it?
It was Marshall.
All right, John Marshall is the Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court under John Adams. Marshall was an aide-de-camp to George Washington. So he is a military aide to Washington. And so he writes this 5-volume set on the life of Washington with 6 years after Washington died. He died in 1799, 1805. He's starting to publish this. And it takes him 2 years to publish all 5 volumes.
Yes, and it's amazing talking about the history of the life of Washington, who he was. And you can imagine, I mean, it is 5 volumes, quite extensive. I mean, you can see, we got this book set from a family up in Illinois. It's just an incredible family to donate stuff to us. But they were in disarray. And so I've been repairing them. You can see here.
Various stages. What are the stages you got here? I mean, this one looks like it's done pretty much.
This one here is probably one of the closest ones to being finished. Not only we had detached boards, so you end up having to repair the spine, but you end up having to, and I kid you not, take a paintbrush to a 200-plus-year-old book and talk about nerve-wracking is when you've got something this valuable and this priceless, and you're in there working on trying to mold and paint what the original leather was and what you're trying to create on the side to make it look like it was an original.
And what happens is the leather from this stuff is so brittle that nearly always the spines detach.
So here we have Japanese tissue.
The boards are off, and so you're rebinding, you're putting the binding back together with that Japanese tissue, and then that's what you have to paint to make it the same color as this. And then it looks like the originals again.
Yeah, and you can see here that we've got the base coat down. You can kind of see that in the process, and when it's finished, it'll look like the original set. And literally, this is so that Glenn can take this and read it in its original form, and be able to look at it. And I mean, we're talking 210 plus years ago. This was written and published
by a guy who knew Washington personally, an eyewitness, a guy who served with him throughout the Revolution. Hand me those two books right there, if you would, because Eyewitness it's a really big deal. Washington did all these letters, and the Founding Fathers back then, and by the way, the Stony Point letter you had, it's a copy of a letter from George Washington got the copy of the letter, but the Founding Fathers, when they did letters, usually did at least one copy, maybe more, and part of that was for their own records. Part of it was, in George Washington's case, the British started taking his letters and rewriting them and publishing them, make him look bad, propaganda. Washington said, no, here's the original copy.
We don't have an email trail
that's right.
back then, and so they had to copy
copies.
them.
Yes, and so if you wrote
hand copies.
If you wrote 20,000 letters in your life, you wrote 20,000 copies with it. So you've got 40,000 letters and you kept the copies. So eyewitnesses are really, really key. And so the writings of George Washington, the first collected set of his writings came out in 1832. Jared Sparks, who was the president of Harvard, he was also chaplain in Congress, historian, and he did a lot of history books. He brought together the 12-volume set of Washington's writings, the first collection of all the letters that were known at the time. And in it, he interviews eyewitnesses. He interviews Nellie. We looked at the picture of Nellie. Nellie lived with George for 20 years at Mount Vernon. And he asked Nellie, he said, Nellie, what about the faith of George Washington? Was he a Christian? And Nellie went through, it's great. It goes through several pages of what Washington did with his faith. He prayed for, laid hands on people, prayed for them, prayed for healing, all sorts of things you don't think of today. She said, you might as well question his patriotism as question his Christianity. I mean, if you're going to say he's not a Christian, then don't even say he's a patriot, and that's ridiculous. We would say he's a patriot. So it's that kind of stuff, and Marshall has that as well. And so this came out in 1855. John Frederick Schroeder took that 1832 set of Washington's writings, and this is called the Maxims of George Washington. And so what he does is he goes through and gets all the pithy sayings of Washington. There's really good sayings that Washington has. There's sayings on morality and agriculture and Congress and laws and foreign affairs. And at the end of this thing, it's got his sayings, on, his maxims on Christianity. And so here with Christianity, it has all these eyewitnesses talking about him. And one of the people it talks about is John Marshall. And John Marshall says he was a sincere believer in the Christian faith, right here. So this is the eyewitness testimony they got for George Washington, and then it has his religious maxims, and they started every section with eyewitnesses who knew him in the military, who knew him in agriculture, who knew him. Here's his benevolence, and here's people talking about his kindness and benevolence and what he did with social charity. So all of these things. I mean, it's Washington. I mean, it's Franklin, and it's Lafayette, and it's Marshall, and all these guys. Well, here's the modern reprint of this book, and this modern reprint of this book. The historian at Mount Vernon, go here to the maxims. These are the religious maxims. Here's the religious maxims. You see how all this starts here with the eyewitnesses.
They've been removed.
All the eyewitnesses are gone.
Gone.
And where all these guys say Washington was a Christian, the historian there at Mount Vernon says Washington's a deist. Wait a minute. What happened to the guys who knew him and who were with him, who saw him throughout the war and throughout his administration? What about all these other guys? You have here one of his pastors, you have a federal judge that Washington appointed, you have a soldier with him in the Revolution, all these eyewitnesses. And so that's why this kind of stuff is so significant, and maintaining and keeping and preserving this where that it's still available for this generation, because this is the kind of nonsense that's coming out in history books now. And you got to go back to the originals and look at the originals.
It's rewriting. And that is exactly why Glenn wants to collect some of the original stuff, so that he can go back to the originals, because guess what? Over time it gets...
And that's why at M1, what we're doing at Mercury One, part of our objective is preserving and restoring and putting history back out there. And so one of the things we're working on, one of the things that M1 does, is we're building libraries of original documents. You know, Glenn, 5, 6, 7 years ago, we were talking together, and he said, let's just suppose America went under, and we want to bring it back. What works would we have to have? What would we have to know to bring America back to where it had been strong again? And this was the kind of stuff that we talked about.
Yes.
You got to have this kind of stuff. You got to bring this back. And this is for the purpose that we're going to have eventually at some point summer internships, not only for families but for kids. They'll come, they'll get their head full of the right kind of history. They'll go back to the universities, be able to say to the professor, no, you're not right. I saw the actual books myself, and here's what it said, and you're quoting some other professor. And so there's going to be an equipping, and that'll come with M1, but that's what we're doing right now, is helping collect all these type of artifacts and documents. Because what we've covered just in this stuff on George Washington, who knows this? Nobody gets this.
It's amazing
kind of
some of the
today.
stuff that you can find. And studying on your own, purchasing a few books.
And we've got some other things to cover as well, but just kind of show you the tone too, how they finished the revolution. This is the proclamation from John Hancock at the end of the American Revolution. We've now won the Battle of Yorktown, we're now free. And this is such a God-centered proclamation. And this is the life of Washington. I mean, this is the tone of the day. This is exactly what they did, but this is the actual proclamation from Hancock. Hancock actually issued 22 different prayer proclamations in his life, and this is one at the end of the American Revolution. So when we say George Washington's a Christian, you've got this culture, but you've got the eyewitnesses who saw him and the others as well. So
looks like you have in handwriting down here 1781 for this copy.
1781. Yeah, this is the original that was issued at the end of the Revolution.
It's amazing.
Fun stuff.
It is.
Let's start with this painting. This painting, which is the Arnold Freeberg painting of the prayer at Valley Forge. I think this is the most important painting in American history of Valley Forge. By the way, his family is here with us tonight. Arnold painted this for the American Bicentennial, and he wanted it to be shared with everybody. Everybody. He felt it could teach us about the foundation of America. George Washington praying in the snow of Valley Forge. But it's not exactly accurate, because George Washington normally prayed looking up, with his eyes wide open, speaking his prayer. But everything else in this is accurate. Arnold went to Valley Forge and he looked at the trees. He wanted to make sure the trees were exactly right, to depict him exactly how it might have been. Now we know this is true. This is not just out of the figment of somebody's imagination. We know this is true because of one man. Let me take you over to Valley Forge. Something else was going on at the same time. This, I'm really tempted to take it out before I give it back to the people who own it and just put a Duraflame in here and say, what? This is an amazing piece of history. This is a beam that is soaked with the blood of patriots. This beam was underneath the surgeon's table at Valley Forge. So all of the blood that was shed soaked into this beam. Let me take you over here. George Washington won. He won our independence with our troops because of a couple of things. This is one of 3 known to be in existence. We believe it to be the only complete certificate of badge of merit. It says it right here. The above has been honored with the badge of merit. That's the original Purple Heart, signed by George Washington. And this, there's only 8 left in the world. This is one of the 8. The king wouldn't let Americans print the Bible here in America. He refused to let us do it. The moment we won our freedom, Congress printed this Bible. Congress printed this Bible. Congress. But to me, what makes this special is not just that Congress had this printed. When George Washington finally got his hands on it, he held it in his hands and he said, finally, something of great, profound value to give to the men who served in the war. This was his gift to the patriots that freed the world. 8 are left. He was a man of great and tremendous faith, and that is why we are free today. That painting is absolutely true. He got down on his knees and he begged the Lord. We know this is true because of one man. You see, the cherry tree is a myth. This is true. Isaac Potts is the witness to this. And he didn't want to say anything nice about George Washington. Isaac Potts was on the other side. He was a redcoat. He was British. He followed the general into the forest. He was standing somewhere in those trees watching him. He saw Washington get down on his knees and start to pray aloud, as was his custom. He left. He ran back home and told his wife, "We are on the wrong side. I heard this man. I heard the way he reveres God. I heard his prayer. We're on the wrong side. We are going to lose." That was Washington. That's where we began. That is our inheritance. God blessed America with George Washington. It is not over. We have not yet begun to restore ourselves and restore and reclaim our great nation. The Puritans, they didn't leave Plymouth after a day. Washington didn't pack up because it was kind of chilly last night. He got down on one knee and he looked to the heavens and he called down the blessings of heaven. Dear God Almighty, protect our nation and this mission. That's how it happened. He had firm reliance on the protection of divine providence. I testify to you that God lives, that God is with us, that God is our sovereign, and with Him, our battle has already been won.